Joining me today is Mark Sleboda. He's an international relations and security expert based in Moscow. We were actually planning to do another update on the situation in Ukraine, and Mark suggested that we talk about this increase in sabotage, cross-border operations by Ukrainian forces, and I wanted to incorporate into that the terrorism component that we've seen Ukraine using. And since then, there was the assassination of Darya Dugina, daughter of Alexander Dugin, and the Western media is doing what it always does, disinformation, and we kind of want to set the record straight. So welcome, Mark. Any first thoughts on this? You shared your thoughts on that marathon open house that we had, and your comments were really powerful, but it was like a 4-hour long session. So maybe you want to tell us how you're feeling about this now. What are the latest updates on this?
Yeah, Brian, thanks for having me. It's an honor and a pleasure to be back on the new Atlas already. So first of all, let me just we'll start, I guess, with the sabotage campaign, but the two subjects are intimately linked. And I think you've already mentioned as much on one of your previous shows that I watched, but because the regime in Kiev is incapable at this point of any successes on the battlefield, right? They're obviously not capable of a counteroffensive in Kherson, at least not one that doesn't go in the opposite direction with Russia almost accidentally expanding towards Nikolaev because the Kiev regime forces had been so decimated already by artillery that at the first probing reconnaissance, they just packed up whatever was left, and Russians are like, oh, I guess we've got this now. So that went already 2 settlements further, quite significant territory towards Nikolaev, and now Russian forces are only 20 kilometers outside the city and coming in from 2 directions. So that looks pretty bad there. But so they still need victories, right? They need to project a domestic image of strength and that they are in control because there are enough domestic dissent. I mean, we've got a regime that has already arrested thousands for being traitors and collaborators. And there are domestic disagreements even between the Maidan forces, between the ultra-nationalists and the Zelensky regime, both seeking to use each other. And Poroshenko still has his toe in that mix. He was charged with treason because Zelensky charged the head of just about every significant political opposition party in the country with treason. So even charged his Poroshenko, even though on his own side as well, as far as anyone can tell, simply out of domestic political grievances. The West forced Zelensky to release him, even though he's still charged, and Poroshenko is still playing around in the backyard. And there is significant reason to believe that Zelensky is taking some of this opportunity to eliminate some of the oligarchs that were politically not completely in line with him, as if specifically backing Poroshenko instead of him. And they have ended up dead in the past months, at least 2 of them. So there may be some consolidation going on under the cover of the war. But without able to manufacture any victory, and with waning, flagging Western support, particularly from Europe, he needs successes. He needs to show that Kiev is fighting back. He needs to grab headlines, and sabotage attacks behind enemy lines. Some of them more significant, but ultimately on a strategic level, just pinpricks and a tiny fraction 1 or 2 incidences a week, a tiny fraction of what the Russian military is unleashing, without any reporting by Kiev or the West on the Kiev regime's forces and institutions every single day. It still has an effect primarily psychologically, right? Again, it's that attention grabbing foreign headlines, but also there is a morale effect when you have seen some of these sabotage attacks within Crimea itself and within Russia, particularly in Belgorod, the region nearest Kharkov, which is within the easiest reach of Kiev regime forces in Kharkov. And most of these instances appear to have been sabotage teams that have infiltrated the territory. And that's not so hard to do when you have to consider that there are hundreds, thousands on some days of Ukrainian refugees trying to get out of Kiev regime controlled territory and into Russian controlled territory, into Kherson and then on to Crimea. And the same thing in the Donbass and in the Kharkov direction. And even CNN has reported on that. And they were much surprised that people are trying to get from Kiev regime controlled territory into Russian controlled territory. But that was noted. That's one that slipped by them. So they need these victories, and the sabotage attacks grab some headlines. Even if they don't make a strategic difference, they do that. And I still have family in the Crimea. My mother-in-law is in Simferopol, and we've got some other family there as well. So, of course, it is always a moment of every night now there are drone attacks. And for the most part, these seem to be makeshift commercial drones that are outfitted with grenades or something of the like and flown by sabotage units internally, not doing a lot of damage. There was one more significant attack on the Saki airfield, but they have a psychological effect. And
just one detail. These are drones that are being smuggled into Crimea and then operated very close to these targets. Is that correct? Because
that's what it seems to be. That's what it seems to be. I mean, these are not combat drones. That is for sure. At least one instance near Belgorod, it may have been a kamikaze drone. But we have also seen that, and this is very similar to what is happening with the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant. Devoid of being able to, have any type of military victory, the Kiev regime is quite obviously firing on Russian forces that have had jurisdiction, that have had control over the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant since the beginning of March. Now, the Ukrainian staff continues to run the plant. They're all locals. And Russian, the power plant continues to provide energy to Kiev regime-controlled parts of Ukraine. The plant, it's the largest nuclear power plant in Europe. And it provides some total of 20%, a whole fifth of Ukraine's total electricity is provided by that plant. So it's pretty significant. And if the Kiev regime, again, for reasons of trying to create some type of international incident to grab attention, headlines, perhaps even once again a desperate attempt to draw the West into the conflict, to draw NATO in, saying the West, if they don't do anything when, the Kiev regime's story about the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant, that Russian forces are occupying the plant and firing out of it with heavy artillery so that the Kiev regime can't fire back. But at the same time, firing into the plant from outside to kill themselves, blowing themselves up in a nuclear explosion to blame Kiev. I don't think really anyone seriously believes that. I think it's, this mental type of deception where, you can't possibly blame your side. And that's, of course, how the Western media sees Kiev. So That's going on. And we know that they've attacked the plant because the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense told us so. One of the first attacks on the plant was a kamikaze suicide drone attack. The Ukrainian Ministry of Defense tweeted quite boastingly about it on Telegram, on their official channel, that they had struck Russian forces that were within the grounds of the nuclear power plant. And then after that, it became, oh, that's not us hitting them. They're hitting themselves, which is, to be fair, the exact same thing they've said about the Donbass for the entire 8 years. Those pro-Russian separatists keep shelling themselves in their cities. How stupid of them, you know? And the Western media says, well, both sides are blaming each other, so we don't know, right?
Yeah, we don't. Yeah, it's impossible for them to investigate,
the
right?
most cynical, despicable, real, attempted equivocation. But that's what we're seeing: threat of nuclear terrorism. We're seeing attacks on targets in Crimea and Belgorod. We have also now seen actual political terrorism,
Yes.
and that this is the most tragic event of the week, and the potential repercussions of this and the precedent it sets. Darya Dugina, the daughter of the Russian philosopher, political figure, writer, Alexander Dugin, much vilified in the Western press, just made into a complete caricatured bogeyman figure, and simultaneously exaggerated out of all importance. Dugin and his daughter are marginal political players in Russia. Dugin has no access or no influence over the Kremlin, over Putin. He is not Putin's brain. He's neither him nor his daughter had ever met or spoke to Putin before his daughter was killed in this cold-blooded murder, this terrorist attack. It seems pretty clear what happened. And the facts that the Russian FSB, the security services, have presented are pretty hard to put any serious doubts on. They've provided video. So what appears to have happened is that Dugin and his daughter were targeted specifically because, despite his lack of any real influence in Russia, a marginal political figure, no effect on policy on Ukraine or anything else with Putin. But because he's been blown up in the Western minds and in the propaganda of the Kiev regime to fit the bogeyman figure that they want, it would still be a victory because the meme is more important than the reality. So that's why he was targeted, and a completely soft target. That can't be left out of it either. So a woman by the name she entered the country on her married name, Natalia Volk. She is a Ukrainian. She was previously a member of the Azov neo-Nazi battalion. Evidently, most of the work she did was in the office, but she was actually a member of the neo-Nazi death squad. And she was picked up, as so many of Azov's people have been, by the SBU, the Ukrainian intelligence services. She crossed the border into Russia under fake ID. She brought her 12-year-old daughter with her as cover, evidently. She once in the country, she changed her license plates. They've got video of her doing this. They changed her hair color. She changed her hair color. She entered in July, so this has been more than a month in preparation. She rented out a flat in Darya Dugina's apartment building to surveil her. She lived there for a month. And then a couple of days ago, she went to a tradition festival just outside of Tradition and Culture Festival that the Dugins go to, and they've pretty much founded and headline every year. And she put a bomb, obviously, during the festival. She or someone else. We don't know actually yet if she planted it. We know she was involved. We know that she surveilled. We know that she fled the country immediately afterwards. Was she working with someone else? Did someone else plant the bomb and actually remotely detonate it? We don't know that yet. But we know that she was involved and that she fled the country. She put it beneath the driver's side of Daria's SUV, Toyota SUV. And it was detonated while she was driving back. And I think there is a presumption that Alexander Dugin probably would have been in the car as well. He was not. But obviously, they would have someone knowing this. And the fact that Darya Dugin was the one being surveilled leads some credence to some other figures that we have heard from in Kiev that say Darya Dugin was specifically targeted, at least as well. And we know this because the Mirotvorets hit list, the hit list that was created by Ukrainian ultranationalists, Banderite fascists. The translation of the name is, sickeningly enough, the Peacemaker. It has thousands of people on it. Anyone and everyone who is either a journalist or a public figure or celebrity who has criticized the Kiev regime and been declared an enemy of the state. And Darya Dugin and her father, Alexander Dugin, were also on that list, where they joined the preeminent American realist international relations scholar, John Mearsheimer, Henry Kissinger, the former German Chancellor, Gerhard Schroeder, Waters, the Pink Floyd, ex-Pink, Roger Waters, Pink Floyd singer, and many, many others on that list. And even the Wikipedia entry admits, and the Ukrainian media and even the Western media has admitted, that this list is curated by the Ukrainian intelligence services and is promoted by the Interior Ministry. And whenever someone on that list is killed, they are marked as eliminated. And Darya Dugin profile on there has now been marked as a successful elimination. Whatever Kiev's protests, we didn't do it, for what that is worth. She's not the first one, by far. There was a prominent Ukrainian journalist extremely critical of the Maidan and the regime that followed, Oleg Buzina. He was also targeted and killed in Ukraine. We have seen former Ukrainian politicians that were in office up until 2014 put on the list and then killed as well. They were both on this list. And it has to be said that they were also both on Western sanctions lists. Again, for whatever meme is greater than the reality reason. Alexander Dugin was on U.S. and other sanctions lists, and Darya Dugin was listed on the U.K. sanctions list. It's really hard to understand why. They are civilians. They are academics. Like I said, at least up till now, they have been marginal, fringe players in Russian politics and society. Alexander Dugin, I worked with him. I was a colleague of his in the sociology faculty at Moscow State University. That's how I met him and his daughter, and I consider them both friends. Doesn't mean I've always agreed with everything that Alexander Dugin has always said, ever said and written. And to be fair, Alexander Dugin doesn't agree with everything he said or written 20 years ago by any far stretch. We've all gone through our political evolutions. Mea culpa, I helped try to get John Kerry reelected once upon a time, or elected.
I voted for George Bush. That was the first election I voted in, and then I joined the Marine Corps. So
I don't feel that. I don't feel that bad now. All right.
Yeah.
All right. So the point is, we've all gone through our political evolutions. And what Dugin was in the 1980s, he is not now. I worked with him closely in the sociology faculty. We were both teaching there. I helped translate one of his most recent books, The Fourth Political Theory. The fact that the Western media is calling Dugin an ultra-nationalist or even a fascist, but somehow Azov neo-Nazis, Andrei Belitsky and many others in the Kiev regime Rada, Kraken, Right Sector, they're not fascists. They're not Nazis, but Alexander Dugin and his 30-year-old daughter are. And Daria, I mean, she was such a bright light to be taken. She was just 29. She had just finished her PhD in philosophy. She was a budding philosopher, a political activist, a journalist, and it seems that in particular the Azov, the neo-Nazis, took a particular hatred to her because she went to Azovstal, the factory where they had held out in Mariupol for some time. And she did a tour of that, and she did interviews with the people of Mariupol, with them commenting how they had been used as human shields. They had been being shot at by Azov for trying to flee the city as traitors and so forth. And she had made a comment that has been so distorted in the social media sphere. Darya Dugin is calling for the genocide of all Ukrainians. Her actual statements were that the war crimes that Azov committed in Mariupol against the people of Mariupol were inhuman, and that they should all face war crimes tribunals. That was her actual statement. But this was much hated on, evidently, by Azov, which helped particularly make her a target. And I think there is also a bit of the regarding of them as Dugins as race traitors, because the Dugin family, generations back, actually originally came from Poltava. They're from Ukraine. So any idea that Dugin is some type, calling for Ukrainian genocide, neither him nor his daughter, that has never happened. That is all distortions of what has been said. And at her funeral, Alexander Dugin, who was in the car behind and saw his daughter blown up before his eyes, he said, "We are not at war. We are at war in Ukraine. We are not at war with Ukraine." I mean, those are the words of a measured and restrained man, considering that his daughter has just, his pride and joy, the one to carry forth his intellectual legacy, was just wiped off the earth and marked up on a Kiev regime hit list that they have accomplished what they set out to accomplish. And she was a friend, and I think the world is a lesser place now. And this is the precedent we're facing. We are at the early days of the new Cold War / hot war. Is it now acceptable to kill ordinary citizens, academics, public figures on either side because we disagree with their politics? Is that already where we're at? And the fact that the Western governments have let the woman who the Russian intelligence services have identified as committed it, or at least being a big part in it, slide right through Estonia, Austria, evidently, and I'm sure she will be disappeared along with the Skripals in some CIA bolt hole somewhere. It says very clearly that they are culpable. At the very least, they seem, the CIA, MI6 gave a green light to this whole affair.
And I just want to touch on something I'm pretty sure you said in your recent interview with the Grayzone, which I'll link to in the video description below. Excellent interview, a lot of information. We are told that this war in Ukraine, this is a battle between authoritarianism, Russia, and the Western democratic world. And yet this is how Ukraine conducts itself. And I just want to point out a couple of articles. And again, this is Pravda, Ukraine, pro-Russian media blogger shot and killed in Kherson. And if you read through this, the way they word all of this is this guy deserved it. He got what was coming to him.
Yeah.
He is a blogger, and they killed him. There are other articles. This is from Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty. This is funded by the U.S. State Department. Moscow imposed official in Russian-occupied Ukrainian city killed by car bomb. Again, just in the title alone, there's no condemnation at all throughout this entire article. This is building a case for why a political figure deserved to be killed in this manner. This is how Ukraine has been conducting themselves, not just since the end of February, but since all the way back in 2014, from 2014 onward. And they have this Al Jazeera article. Ukraine investigates attacks those who collaborate with Russia. Nearly 500 people are being investigated for collaboration, as some are killed in targeted attacks. Actually, a lot have been killed in targeted attacks. And this goes all the way back from 2014 onward. There is a pattern here. This is not a one-off thing. So when I see articles like this from CNN, car bombs and confusion, Dugina killing is a flashback to 1990s Russia. No, actually, it is a feature of 2014 onward Ukraine. That is what it actually is. And as you see, all of my sources so far are all from the Western media admitting this. They admit this, but they bury it. They bury it in the article, and the headline is supposed to steer you in a direction that justifies all of this. You were talking about the sabotage, the cross-border sabotage. We know Ukrainians are crossing the border to carry out sabotage, either with drones or with special forces, sabotage groups. Certainly, they're going to cross the border to try to carry out these assassinations, as yes, the FSB is saying. And you were just talking about how it's not just Russians or pro-Russian Ukrainians that are being targeted. It's even others within Ukrainian administration who are not in lockstep with the government. So this is a pattern, and this is the true face of Ukraine, and this is what the Western world, this is what they're backing. This is what they're backing, trying to defend, trying to distract away from, or bury. You have anything you want to? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, on my own YouTube channel, the little videos that I've done there, I've done 2 videos. If you're interested in hearing more about the Kiev regime's war on its own citizens, on the collaborators and traitors, and one of them, one of these officials, Denis Kirilev, he was one of the first peace negotiators during. We might remember early in this conflict, there were actually peace negotiations before the U.S. and the U.K. said, no more peace negotiations. We just want war. More with the Ukrainian cannon fodder. Here's some stuff for them. He was one of the first peace negotiators, and he was killed in broad daylight walking into a courthouse in downtown Kiev. And it was openly admitted in the Ukrainian press and by Ukrainian Rada members that he was gunned down by the SBU, by the Ukrainian intelligence services, for being a traitor. We've also seen even a former deputy director of the SBU killed in the same fashion This one was actually on video because it happened in front of a traffic light. His car was surrounded and people came out on both sides, just lit the car up with automatic weapons and summarily executed him. And we've heard confirmation from this. The Kiev appointed governor of Nikolaev, Vitaly Kim, this guy's a real piece of work. He recently put Nikolaev for several days on lockdown with house-to-house searches for traitors and collaborators conducted by his neo-Nazi brown shirts. And he had said to the Ukrainian media, right, to not to the Russian media, to the Ukrainian media, I don't trust anyone. Everyone is a traitor.
This is not a secure government. And again, something else that you said, this is not a nation that is united. This is a nation that's being torn apart by the very nature of the regime that was in power since 2014.
Vitaly Kim admitted that there is a special death squad set up and operating that goes around the country summarily executing people that the regime declares to be traitors in one form or another. And he says, all the collaborators need to be killed, and I'm not afraid to use that word.
Do you remember this from Amnesty International? This is way back from 2014. Ukraine must stop ongoing abuses and war crimes by pro-Ukrainian volunteer forces. And these are the nationalists, the Nazi battalions, a lot of them now officially incorporated into Ukraine's armed forces. And that is exactly what they were doing. So this isn't just Mark Sleboda and Brian Berletic and their Putin propaganda. This is also from Western organizations like Amnesty International, who more times than not will try to cover this up, but just so that they're on record, so that they can cover themselves in the future. They have admitted this. So you're not just making this up. This is something that even the West admits is going on, has been since 2014.
They've admitted it. When they killed Denis Kerev, they put out an official statement. We killed him on the street because he was a traitor. I mean,
yes.
Now, the Western media didn't report that at all, right? Because this is something that you can get from reading the Ukrainian media if you're lucky enough to be able to read Ukrainian, or at least through some extensive use of Google Translate. If you can't, try to, because they say a lot of things that the Western media will never report to you because it doesn't fit the narrative that they're trying to sell you about Ukraine, about the Kiev regime, because they leave out all the stuff that makes the regime look bad.
Yes. And I just one more article. This one from the BBC. I just saw this today, and they're saying Moscow murder accusation is fiction, says Ukraine, and they say this is not how we operate. And we just got over it with Western sources, with self-admissions that yes, this is exactly how they operate. This is just the latest horrific crime in a long string of a pattern of exactly these type of crimes. And I think that is one of the main things that I wanted to bring you on to show people that this is a pattern. And now the Western media, what does it mean when they're trying to act as if there's some kind of doubt, that some benefit of the doubt we can extend Ukraine, that maybe somehow they weren't behind this? I mean, what does it mean when the Western media does this, when it's so obvious that they were certainly involved and they have been doing this? I feel like they're accomplices. It makes them
fully culpable, fully culpable. This, I mean, the information war is real. It has real world consequences, and the Western media is fully in a type of you want to call it self-censorship, fully on board with it, right? I mean, it's often been said of the Western media that it is in lockstep with, government on foreign policy to a degree that would make, real dictators blush because of its uniformity and its rigidity in backing the official line, even when that official line is ridiculous and absurd, and even they don't believe it. But they have to conduct the information war in a certain way. It's just, you are the targets of that. I mean,
Yes.
the people out here, it's not the Russian people that are the targets of that, or the Chinese people, or anyone else, because they don't speak English. It's you who are the targets of that disinformation, that propaganda war. They're fighting for your minds. And it's incredibly effective.
And I just I want to point out that that's not the only list that they have out there. Ukraine has been conducting this campaign of intimidation, making these lists specifically to frighten people, to try to silence them. And again, this is what we're told. The West stands for free speech, freedom of expression, free press, and yet they're doing the exact opposite. And this list in particular, I'm on this list. And I'm an extremely minor character in all of this.
Badge of honor.
Somehow I'm in a way. But I just wonder. This is the other thing I wanted to get into. I wanted to get into what is the impact this latest crime has had on Russian society, and what does all of this mean? Because my interpretation is a government that is putting someone like me on a list. This explains why they're losing this war, because they are not using their time efficiently. They are wasting their time on things like this that are actually in the long term going to hurt their cause. People say, well, look how it's galvanizing Russian society. And Mark, you could tell us if this is what's actually happening. Why would they do that? Well, that's a good question. Why would Ukraine lend themselves to this U.S. proxy war in the first place and sacrifice themselves and go over the edge of a cliff in the first place? Because the U.S. put these extremists into power to do that specifically. That is what makes them extremists. What do you think about that, Mark?
First, I just actually wanted to say that it's not just in Ukraine that they're doing this. All over Europe right now, European countries, in the Baltics, in Germany, elsewhere in Europe, people are being arrested just for expressing pro-Russian, anti-Kiev views. I mean, people are being arrested for making social media posts, right, in the liberal democratic West. That should say something. And not just Westerners. I mean, there are actual Ukrainians. Anatoly Shary, the leader of a libertarian party in Ukraine, who fell afoul, not by being pro-Russian, but simply by being anti-Kiev. He fled to the West. He was declared a traitor by Zelensky, because he's declared every opposition leader to be a traitor. And he was arrested in Spain for saying things against the Kiev regime. And he's a Ukrainian dissident. So much for freedom of speech and liberal values in the West. All the masks are off, right? That is one of the benefits of all of this. All the pretense, that it's really about human rights and values and not about naked geopolitics. It's all gone now. It's all clear. You're arresting your own citizens for disagreeing with the government's foreign policy on Ukraine.
What impact is this having on Russian? This most recent killing, especially. What is the feeling there? You're in Moscow. What is the feeling there, and how is the local media covering this?
Okay, so like I said, I mean, it's not like thousands are mourning in black in the streets, because, as I said, Alexander and Dugin are both marginal figures in Russian society. They are not Putin's brain, like the Western media would have you believe. Completely untrue. But certainly this has grabbed headlines because a 29-year-old Russian girl was killed in cold blood by a terrorist assassination in the capital, just outside the capital of the country. And more people are suddenly becoming aware of, Daria and her father, I think, than ever before. And you know, it is certainly serving a rally around the flag effect, and there is a lot of knee jerk, you know, bomb the f out of Kiev. I mean, that is the attitude of a lot of people that I have heard talking just on the street and so forth. And there is a lot of that in the newspapers as well. I think the government is a little more Putin government is a little more pragmatic and maybe cold-blooded about that, but I don't think you'll see that type of knee-jerk reaction. I do expect to see the decision-making centers. I mean, any node, any SBU building is certainly fair target now, if they weren't before. So that is certainly something that's going to happen. But one of the things that I think is going to result out of this is that Alexander Dugin, who survived his 29-year-old daughter, a marginal political figure before, I think he's going to have renewed significance on the scene. And he was actually very strident in 2014 after the Odessa massacre, in particular, that Russia needed to intervene then. And he was very critical of the regime at a time when the government, the Putin administration, was pushing towards the Minsk Accords, pushing towards a frozen conflict and trying to politically reconcile Ukraine in a grand agreement with Europe, with France and Germany, and with the US nominally on board. Of course, we know from Angela Merkel, we know from Poroshenko, that no, they never intended to actually fulfill the Minsk Accords, that they were just using it as time to build up a NATO-trained and armed military. Alexander Dugin, because he disagreed with this, the Kremlin pushed to have him removed from his teaching position at MGU. And then they kind of put an informal ban on him on Russian media. No more interviews, no more of the political talk shows of which he was a regular feature as kind of an agent provocateur and an extremely learned individual. But now things are different. And I think he is going to have renewed political significance. And a lot of Russians are going to say, hey, actually, Dugin was right in 2014. And the Putin administration was wrong back then. And they've come to realize that now. But Dugin is not the bogeyman that the West has tried to create, out of him to be. He's much caricatured, again, without saying that I agree with everything of his. But I think the West will very, very much regret a Russia where Alexander Dugin has renewed significance, because the number one feature of his political philosophy is opposition to Western hegemony. That is a multipolar world. Yes, opposition to Western hegemony is number one on his list, and it's not like Russia already hasn't fallen into that camp by default. That's certainly not where Putin wanted to take the country when he first came into it was first elected in the early 2000s. But I think the West will very much regret a Russia where Alexander Dugin is seen as a martyred figure because of the murder of his daughter.
And maybe you have been seeing and hearing this also. Even ordinary Russian people who are not into politics, who aren't interested in anybody's political ideas, and certainly not Alexander Dugin's ideas, but they saw this. They see an explosion. It was near Moscow. It killed a young woman, and they say, "This is whatever I think about things politically, or I don't even care about politics. This is an obvious threat to everyone. I mean, this is something that was done here. This is a problem that needs to be solved." And so again, and people say, "Well, why would Ukraine do that to themselves?" Well, why would they be in this situation in the first place anyway, because that is exactly who the U.S. purposefully put into power from 2014 onward. People who would specifically go along with this self-destructive proxy tension and now proxy conflict with Russia. I just want to add on to what you said about Putin and Dugin. They have never even met. There's not a single. You read over and over again in the Western media this week. He's Putin's brain, and there's not even a single picture. Yeah, there's not even a single picture of them together. And I was surfing Google image search, and I found this picture. And this is not Alexander Dugin, and you can see how long ago this was.
Where is this? What media is this? Oh my God!
Well, you know, it's. I don't even think that it's a prominent media platform.
Yeah, but I've seen it all over social media. For those who don't know, that is not Putin meeting Alexander Dugin. I know that they're both old white men with Orthodox beards, but that is Alexander Solzhenitsyn, the author of the Gulag Archipelago. And by the way, unlike Dugin, an actual Russian nationalist, an ethnic nationalist.
This is what he looks like, and it is not Alexander Dugin. And I saw reports that used that photo, and then they realized that it wasn't Alexander Dugin, so they took it down. And then they just put, like, it's funny because it's not funny, but it is. They have a picture of Putin on one side and Dugin on the other side, and they're clearly two pictures, and there's like a divide in the middle. Why can't you find a photo of Putin's brain with Putin? Why is that so hard to do? Because we're being lied to, and we're being lied to on a level just as cartoonish as we were when they talked about the ghost of Kiev, the defenders of Snake Island, WMDs in Iraq. This is all the West does. This is not the first thing that they're telling us the truth about. Mark, do you have any closing thoughts you'd like to share? Where do you think this is? I don't think that decision makers in Moscow are going to change what they were already going to do because of this. I think they are already aware of this is what Ukraine has been doing for quite a while. The regime in Kiev has been doing for quite a while. But what do you think is going to happen after this? Or maybe nothing at all, and they will just continue along this path?
Well, first of all, it obviously marks a security failure in Russia, on the Russian intelligence services and the border services. This woman was identified and outed by Russian OSINT on the Russian internet months ago as a member of Azov and the SBU. And I know she used fake documents, changed her hair color, but I understand there are lots of Ukrainian refugees coming across the border into Donbass and into Russia all the time. But you would think that there should be some type of facial recognition going on there. So obviously they need to up their game. They were able to pick up the traces quickly afterwards, but they weren't able to put the pieces together beforehand. And that's a failure that someone should be held accountable for. So obviously there's going to be increased security in Russia. There are increasing calls in Russia for a greater mobilization using this. I don't think that if the Russian, I personally think that the Russian government should have a greater mobilization, not a mass forced conscription. That's not necessary, not like the Kiev regime is doing. But there's some 2 million military reservists in Russia. Which would be more than necessary to carry this through. But it is certainly going to be one more piece of the black marks, of a maximalist end to this. And we've already heard a month ago now from Sergei Lavrov that because of the amount of Western arms flowing into Ukraine, because of the refusal to negotiate, because of the crimes that are being committed and usually Russia being blamed for them, that the goal is now regime change. That Lavrov said we are going to help the Ukrainian people liberate themselves from this regime, and that may not mean an occupation of the entire country. I don't see Russian forces ever moving into Western Ukraine, where they would not be received favorably by any significant portion of the population. But it is definitely going to be the partition of Ukraine, probably up to the Dnieper at this point, it appears to, and possibly going into Kiev in one fashion or another, not necessarily with troops, but they will be increasing pressure and attempting to remove that regime. I fully expect someday that we will see Zelensky roommates with Juan Guaido and Svetlana Tikhanovskaya taking up an apartment in Brooklyn or Poland or somewhere together, pretending that they are leaders of countries.
Yeah, I agree. And one last thing I just kind of want to throw in, because I am on a list. People who are on these lists should take them somewhat seriously. But I'll tell you what, I'm a person on one of these lists. I am not intimidated. I'm not going to stop what I'm doing. As a matter of fact, I'm going to double down. When I see something like this, it reminds me of how important it is to speak up against what is going on. U.S. foreign policy and the collaborators in Ukraine who are helping facilitate it at the absolute cost of everyone in Ukraine and everyone the West has helped make an enemy of Ukraine. It just makes me want to work twice as hard. I'm sure that's how you feel as well, Mark.
I've been getting death threats since 2014. Most of them, ironically, from the Banderite Ukrainian immigrant community in Canada. Some lovely phone calls there, but yeah, it certainly is not going to stop me from speaking my mind on this whole affair, and it hasn't stopped any members of my family. Most of like, as I said, my wife is Crimean, and we have a lot of family in East Ukraine, so none of them have been intimidated by the worst that this regime can throw at them, and this is only going to galvanize me and many others, maybe harden our hearts a bit more, because we know if this is what they do on their way out, what would they do if they had complete power?
Absolutely. Well said. Mark, I want to thank you so much for coming on again. I'm going to obviously have you back again in the near future. I'm going to put the links to all of the places people can find you in the video description below. Can you just quickly tell everyone where they can find your work?
Sure. I have just a starting up YouTube channel with a number of short videos, The Real Politique with Mark Sleboda. There's only so many Mark Slebodas out there. There are a couple more, but so it's pretty easy to find on YouTube. I'm also, like Brian, on Telegram, and I put a lot of my radio shows. I do a lot of Sputnik. I'm on several of their shows every week, sometimes more than one a day. So I put some of those up there. And I haven't been kicked out of Twitter yet because I have a mass blocking policy of any troll or bot, but I'm sure my days are numbered on that platform as well. But I'm still on Twitter and Facebook as well.
Okay. Well, once again, thank you. Stay safe, and we'll just keep up the good fight. And until next time, bye for now.